Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. You'll hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and writers that cover the NFL on a daily basis. The New Orleans Saints podcast starts right now. Here's your host, Erin Summers.
The Saints kicked off their first set of OTAs on Tuesday. OTAs will be held for the next 3 weeks for a total of 10 days before mandatory minicamp June 13th through 15th. Head coach Dennis Allen spoke with the media following day one on his goals for these organized team activities.
First day out here, back to ball. It's fun getting back out here and getting going. Excited to see, our guys work. Look, we got a lot of getting better to do. There's a lot of new pieces, a lot of moving parts, and we're gonna utilize this opportunity to get better. So we're excited about it.
It was really good to get back out on the practice field, and like Derek Carr said, it was not as hot as he was expecting it to be. Did not feel as hot out there. There was a little bit of a breeze, so that is still yet to come, but it was great to see everybody back on the field and get a look at some of the newest Saints in the black and gold for the first time. We did see quarterback Derek Carr out there, running back Jamal Williams, wide receiver A.T. Perry, defensive lineman Brian Brzee, just to name a few of them. And Carr said there's going to be a learning curve, but he hopes to get down all of the new terminology before minicamp.
Yeah, I mean, it's a new system, new words, a lot of similarities to things that I grew up on and that I believe in. And so it's still a learning curve, but it's not as big of a curve as it could be in a different system or a different offense. And so me today was just trying to have clear communication, getting in and out of the huddle, doing all the little things right. And so there's been a lot of hard work on doing that, but it's just day one. We got more work to do, but it was a good start.
A big storyline out of OTAs was the participation of tight end Foster Moreau. He went through the entire practice just 2 months after being diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma.
The day after the diagnosis, the day after the physical, my agent got a call from Mickey Loomis, and he said, "Hey, we're still interested in him. We still value him as a player, and even more as a person." And again, back to speaking volumes, that was so comforting for me, knowing that regardless of where I went through this process, there was a real good chance I wind up here. And that was just going to be a really cool experience for me. And it is, and I definitely don't take it for granted. I know these streets well. I love these people. It's just anyone who's from here can speak to it. There's something special about this city. There's a different life in these streets, other than the potholes. But it's definitely it's a humbling experience back then and still now.
We just had a brief exposure today. I know he's been in here for about the last 10 days. He's working hard, looks good physically, and I think he's going to be a good addition for us.
Chemistry between Carr and Moreau is already there as the two played together for the Raiders.
There was no learning curve on how to throw him a football. I know how he gets out of breaks and things like that, but I think I don't want to undersell what that man just walked through. That's pretty scary news and a pretty scary thing to go through, and for him to be out there already. I'm not getting to his business, but it's pretty miraculous. I know he's thankful. We were praying for him. He called us, pretty early when he found out, and he's asked my wife and I to pray for him, and obviously we do because we're family. And I'm just happy that he's out there and doing something that he loves to do. And the fact that we get to play together is pretty cool too.
There really is so much to look forward to throughout the next few months leading up to training camp and then once the season starts. But everybody really focused in on the fact that it all comes down to putting in the work now so they can get the wins once the season starts.
I downplay a lot of things, but I came here for one reason and one reason alone, that's to win. And I believe that I can do that. I believe that in myself. I believe in my teammates. I believe in this organization that they can help me do that because I can't do it by myself. No one can. And so I think that I can add value. I think they add value to me, and I think that there's things here where they're helping me be a better football player, and they're pushing me, and they're doing certain things that I'm comfortable with and that I've succeeded at for 9 years. Hey man, you're really good at these things. Let's do those things. And this is something that we like. Let's see if you're good at it. Let's see if it fits you. And I always feel that I can be better because I work to be better every day. So I hope to be better, at least until my body gives out. Until I can't throw it anymore. I'll always be on the mindset of chasing that perfection, knowing that I'm probably never going to get there. But I'll chase it for sure every day, hoping and believing that, there's more. I should say there's better days, for me.
Every opportunity you're out here, or every time you're out here, it's an opportunity to get better. And every one of our players, coaches, everybody can get better at something. I don't care how far advanced you are in your career. There's things that you can do to improve.
To help break down some other storylines surrounding the start of OTAs, let's bring in our senior Saints writer, John DeShazier. JD, we were just getting off of the practice field after the first set of OTAs, first practice. We'll have the first 3 days this week, but this is the first time we were able to actually get out there and see some of the new players in a Saints uniform. What stood out to you just off the bat? What were you watching out there?
Well, you like to watch the quarterbacks. I mean, it's hard to really gauge anything definitively, but one pass Derek Carr made that I really was impressed with because he said basically it's OTAs. You want to take that chance. He threw a deep one to Chris Olave. Wasn't the best pass in the world, but Chris Olave makes a contested catch. And that's one of the things that you noticed that Coach Dennis Allen was talking about at the end of last season. Wanted to have players make contested catches, and obviously that's something that it looks like Chris Olave's worked on. But just the fact that he heaved it to say, okay, we're in OTAs. If you're going to make a mistake, this is the time to make it. I'm going to give my guy a chance to make a play on the ball. I really liked that part of it. And again, the decision-making looked pretty good. I mean, he had a pass this in the seam to Juwan Johnson. So, everything looked smooth. It's an early install. They're giving it to him in bites, small bites, because, the terminology that Derek Carr is accustomed to. He's trying to get up to speed on the terminology that the Saints use. They run the offense that's a lot alike from what he saw in Vegas, but still you've got to get the terminology down. So, those are the things I really was looking at him more so than anything because, defensively, you probably got, most of you guys there, you got the same system. They know the system, but on offense, when you change out quarterbacks, even though he's a veteran, there's still a learning curve.
And Carr talked about that with the media afterwards, saying that, it's the little things, the colors, having to deal with the black and gold, having to not have your guys, your friends around you, getting used to people, getting used to what Pete Carmichael likes, the way that he likes to relay the plays, and it just little nuances of that, the terminology being part of it. But I did think it was interesting that he has watched a lot of tape on a lot of these guys already. He talked about Olave and Shaheed, Juwan Johnson, and is pointing out things that he really likes that he already sees that they do. How long do you think it's going to take, or how well do you think that chemistry is going to develop?
Look, he feels like he's going to have the terminology down by the end of the OTAs. So that accelerates the process. The chemistry with the receivers and the offense, that might take a little bit more time because you got to figure out, he's been watching the film, and as you said, he's got to figure out where guys, how guys break. Really, once you get them out there on the field, what the actual speed is, because Shaheed and Olave can run. So he's got to figure those things out. He's got to figure out, where Juwan Johnson is going to be in the offense. So those things might take a little bit more time, but he'll have at least the terminology down. He says he talks with the coaches constantly, Pete Carmichael and such, and so he wants to make sure that terminology is the same and they're on the same page in terms of what they're seeing and what they're expecting. So, once he's able to relay that to the receivers, hopefully that'll accelerate the process. But they'll have these 10 workouts that he'll be able to do it in OTAs to hopefully accelerate it. And then you get the mini camp, the veteran mini camp, and then you get training camp to where you try to piece it all together.
For the rookies, for the new players coming in, obviously there's A.T. Perry, who's going to be working into the offense there. Kendre Miller will be a little bit longer for him. But how long do you think it takes them until they get comfortable?
As a rookie, your head could be swimming for a couple of games because it's still piece by piece install. And even though they're learning the terminology along with everybody else who's new, like David Carr, but David Carr is a veteran, so he'll pick it up quickly. For them, you're learning the terminology and you're trying to pick up the actual install. And the probably the install that they have right now is so minimal, and I hate to, it's going to increase in volume, and so now you're talking about how fast can you learn. Now, per se, guys on defense, it's not probably quite the same as the guys on offense in terms of having to learn the system, because even though there is a system on the defense, and even though you do need to learn it, you might be able to get by without learning it as quickly. But on offense, if you want to play, you want to be on the field, you've got to know your assignments, because you might be playing one of 2 or 3 positions, especially as a receiver. And so you've got to be able to get out there, and whether you're in the slot or whether you're out wide, you've got to understand exactly what it is you're doing. As a tight end, you got to understand Foster Moreau. You've got to understand, your blocking responsibilities and those kinds of things. And that takes a little bit more time. And so, when you're in that situation, you want to make sure that you've got a guy who understands his responsibilities. You always hear Dennis Allen talk about, whether or not a guy knows what they're doing. Well, that's the thing. You can't put a guy out there if he doesn't know what they're doing, or if he only understands spots of it. You can only use him in certain situations, and teams can figure that out quickly. So the faster he knows the entirety of the playbook, the faster he can get out there and play multiple downs and not be a guy that you can pigeonhole and say, okay, when he comes in on 3rd down, they're going to throw it. Well, maybe they're not if he knows the entire offense. So those are the things that they're trying to pick up as rookies, and they've got to accelerate it. They've been here early. They'll get these OTAs, they'll get the veteran mini camp, and then they get to training camp. And by the time they get to training camp, the really good ones, have kind of figured it out. We kind of saw last year, Chris Olave figured it out quick.
Yeah.
Plus they needed him, but he was a guy who figured it out quickly. And so you need those smart guys to be able to figure it out quickly, because the Saints offense is pretty complex. It's been bits and pieces and added for, since 2006. So it's the same offense base, but you add a little something and you add a twist, and you keep on adding and making it more complicated for the opposing defense. But it also gets complicated for the guys that you bring in who don't have any experience in it. So hopefully they've got the guys that they like, because they always say they like to draft smart, tough players. Well, tough is one thing, smart is another thing, and hopefully those guys are smart enough to pick it all up.
Well, the thing is, when you started that offense, that game plan in 2006, and add to it, you had a lot of the same people there. Drew Brees was the quarterback for 15 years, so you were able to add to it. But Derek Carr said he is going to be working really hard to get on top of this playbook. I saw him several times take an extra time talking to Pete Carmichael before they would run through plays to make sure that he was understanding things right. We've seen the leap that Chris Olave was able to make in his rookie year, Rashid Shaheed, and then Juwan Johnson, and kind of finally coming into his role as a tight end. What players do you think are going to be able to make, a big step this upcoming season?
Well, I think Olave makes another jump. I think Rashid Shaheed makes another jump, because those rookie years, you generally see a nice improvement between the first and second year. Last year was both of those guys' first years. So now Chris Olave becomes a guy who hopefully makes more contested catches, who understands even more so how to use his speed to get in and out of breaks. The same with Rashid Shaheed. We just saw the surface of what he probably is capable of doing, because he's got scare people kind of speed. He's got the kind of speed where when he steps on the field, if you're not going to be able to get hands on him at the line of scrimmage, you better get off of him, because he'll run by you. He's that kind of guy. So I expect to see him make another bit of a jump. And really Juwan Johnson, because last year was really his first year of getting decent playing time at tight end, leads the team in touchdown catches. And we know Derek Carr is a guy who doesn't mind throwing it to the tight end, because he had Darren Waller in Las Vegas. Darren Waller, an all-pro type tight end. If Juwan Johnson continues to raise his level of game, then you expect to see him make another jump. On the offensive line, I thought Cesar Ruiz played decent last year. I know a lot of people, he's got a lot of critics, and sometimes it's like, folks, come on. But I thought he played pretty well last year, and I think he'll make another leap of improvement. I can't wait to see Trevor Penning on the field all the time.
In the position he's supposed to be
in the position he's supposed to be at left tackle, because he's just nasty. He's just a nasty dude when it comes to being on the field. And so, that adds an element to the offense, that guy who blocks to the whistle, and that guy who at some point in the game, an opponent, a defensive line opponent, is probably going to take a swing at him, because nobody wants to be blocked as much as Trevor Penning likes to block him. So I think those guys can make those jumps, and it'll be interesting to see which rookies can jump into the mix, because I do believe Foskey and Brissy on the defensive line, I think those guys, I don't know how much of an impact they can make, but I think they can have an impact, because they're at a position where you got Cam Jordan on your left defensive end, a guy who, for my money, is a Hall of Famer, who draws that attention. And that should hopefully create some opportunities for those guys, because they don't have NFL reputations. Who's going to double team a rookie who's coming in and nobody knows anything about him? So now you just got to be able to beat your guy. And hopefully they can do that consistently to where they can make that impact.
Yeah, I think on the defensive side of the ball, you have a lot of the same players coming back, but you have a whole new coaching staff almost. You have the new defensive coordinator in Joe Woods. You have Marcus Robertson, who is the secondary coach, and new D-line coach, and Todd Grantham. So while you have a lot of consistency with your leadership, with defensive end Cam Jordan, safety Tyrann Mathieu, a lot of those guys coming back, you have new people that are at the helm. How does that affect, how things are going to go forward? Or is it this kind of time, the OTAs, help you kind of figure that out?
Well, I think the beauty is they still run Dennis Allen's system.
Yeah.
As long as it's Dennis Allen's system at base, I think you still have that familiarity. So, now it's how do they teach their individual positions? How does Marcus Robertson teach that secondary? How do they teach their players? And are their players, being driven to be better by that teaching? Because they'll know. Dennis Allen's going to call the defense. He's going to call it on the field, so they'll know what the situation is. I'll be interested to see Alontae Taylor, because he showed flashes of being a stud. He showed flashes of being a real baller last year at cornerback, and so you get him, and you get Marshawn, and you get a Debo, and so now you've got three cornerbacks that you feel really good about, and Bradley Roby's still on the roster too. So now you've got some cornerbacks that you feel really good about. But I really want to see Alontae Taylor, because he's got that fearlessness, and hopefully he'll be able to get his hands on one of those balls and actually intercept it and take it back to the house, because he messed up a couple of interceptions last year. But hopefully he'll work on that part of his game, because he's in the vicinity. So now he's got to work on his ball skills to actually secure the football and be able to maybe take it to the house. But I expect to see a jump from him, because he was so confident last year. I don't think the Saints knew exactly what they had. Even though they drafted him in the second round, you feel like you got a player, but then he got hurt. And then he comes back a little slowly, and then it's like, okay, well, what has he got? And then you got to put him out there as a starter, because people are hurt, and it's like, okay, is this kid going to be able to hold up? Well, he showed that he's able to hold up, and so it'll be interesting to see exactly how much better he can be this year.
Yeah, you've seen him here working out a lot. I mean, he's been putting in time already before OTA started. Jamal Williams, first time we saw him on the field in a Saints uniform, getting some work. The running backs, all of them, were going through some routes as well. He obviously was running as RB1 today without Alvin Kamara on the field. How much do you think he's going to get used? What is he going to add to this team?
Well, I mean, you don't want Alvin to be that sledgehammer. And I think that's what Jamal Williams can be, even though he's capable of being more. But I think you're talking about that, 3rd and 2 guy who, you're going to give it to inside the tackle, or 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 or whatever. And you don't necessarily want to beat up Alvin Kamara that way, because these last couple of seasons, Alvin's carries have gone up, but his receptions have gone down. So he hadn't been quite the offensive weapon that we're accustomed to seeing. Well, if you got Jamal Williams to be able to take some of that pressure off of him in those carries, because historically, Alvin Kamara has been most effective when he's had 12 to maybe 15 carries a game. You get him in the 22, 23, 25 range, And then that's a little bit precarious when you're talking about doing it for 4 or 5 games in a row. Well, if you can split those carries and give those carries to Jamal Williams, you can keep Alvin a whole lot more fresh, keep him being the receiving threat that he's capable of being, and you can have Jamal Williams out there to really punish defenses, when you get to that situation. So, having him out there, I think is going to be really beneficial, and especially maybe early in the season, because we still don't know Alvin's potential suspension situation.
Yeah.
And at some point, we keep on thinking it's going to come down, it's going to come down, it's going to come down. We don't know when or if, but if it does, you have that security with Jamal Williams there, a guy who had, I think, 17 touchdowns for the Lions last year. You got a guy who's capable of carrying the freight until Alvin gets back, which might be several games. So you've got somebody who's been an effective NFL runner who has done it, and that's a luxury that a lot of teams don't have on their squad, on their roster.
And then you have Kendre Miller, who, although he's not playing right now, he would tell you he can do it.
Well,
he hasn't done it yet.
I was about to say, he better be able to do it, because he's talked a lot, and it's a good talk. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying what you believe you can do, but now when he's able to run and get out there, he's gonna have to show he can back it up. He's gonna have to be able to do it, because talk is cheap. So now you got to be able to go out there and do it, and he'll have his opportunities if he's healthy and if Alvin is suspended, because again, those opportunities will open up for him.
Yeah, we saw a lot of people seize opportunities last season, so you never know what can happen when one presents itself to you. Blake Gillikin was booting the ball today. He was kicking very well, brought in a little competition with the punters and the kickers this year.
I think that brings out the best in guys, because Blake Gillikin, I think, had a really, really good rookie year, but I thought it was not as consistent last year. And sometimes, you bring in guys, for camp legs that you just don't want to wear out your number one guys. But sometimes you bring in guys for actual competition where you say, you know what, he didn't have the greatest season in the world, and you know what, we're not going to guarantee you a job. Mm-hmm. So now all of a sudden you see that other guy over your shoulder and you're like, okay, I got to put my best foot forward, literally, and make sure that I secure this job. He does have the resume with the team. He does have, he has skins on the wall, but you bring in another guy after a somewhat uneven second year, and now suddenly it's like, well, we like Blake, but, this guy was more consistent in training camp. This guy was more consistent in OTAs, because that's really where Blake kind of, even though he was not in necessarily a competition with Thomas Morehead, but everybody kept looking, saying, you know what, the Saints might have to think about keeping this guy, because he looks really good. And they were able to get him and stash him on the practice squad and then bring him on when Thomas Morehead left the next year. So, the same situation can happen to you if you're Blake Gillikin. They can bring in a punter and stash him on the practice squad, because they can say, you know what, this guy kicked so well that we don't want to expose him and have him go to another team, and we're going to keep him here. So same thing with Will Lutz. Mm-hmm. Will Lutz had somewhat of an uneven year last year. He was coming back from the core injury, and we understand that, but still, he was not the accurate Will Lutz that we're accustomed to seeing. And so you bring in somebody else saying, just to say, hey, don't breathe easy here. Don't exhale. This job is yours, but it might not be yours, because if we can find another guy who can be more consistent, then we might go with that guy.
First set of OTAs this week. Next one coming up the next week. We have 3 weeks of OTAs before mandatory minicamp starts. Over the next couple of weeks, what are you going to be watching for? I mean, other than attendance always is something we kind of check off at the beginning.
Yeah, I'll still be watching Carr, because, you still want to see, what his progress is and how quickly he's adapting to the offense and how quickly he's picking up the terminology, because he said, again, he feels like he'll be comfortable with it by the time OTAs are done. So you want to see if that actually happens. Always great to see the veterans out there, Cam Jordan and Tyrann Mathieu and Eric McCoy. It's good for Eric McCoy to be out there, because he's working with a new quarterback. So it's always good to see the linemen out there. Hopefully at some point, we don't know what the timetable is for Cesar Ruiz and Trevor Penning, but hopefully at some point we'll be able to see him before training camp. We might not be able to, and it might not be a huge deal as long as they're healthy for training camp. or at least healthy for game one. But you want to see those guys get back out there and get into the mix because, you're dealing with a different cadence with the quarterback. And, you just need to get back out there and get the feel for playing football again. So, you want to see that. Want to see who else maybe might show up, OTAs, because, these vet guys, if it's voluntary, they mean voluntary. So, so maybe, now you don't see Alvin Kamara and you don't see Demario Davis, but what those guys put themselves through in their individual workouts at home or wherever they are is sometimes a lot more grueling than what you see on the practice field in OTAs. And I understand, it's not necessarily the playbook, but Demario Davis knows this defense.
Yeah, they've been here.
Alvin Kamara knows this offense. So, it's not necessarily that they're missing anything from there. And you see some of that crazy stuff Alvin posts on social media, and it's like, what is he doing? And then you see him in a game and people can't get him off balance, and you're like, oh, okay. That's where that played in because it really looks real funky, but he does some stuff that is like, well, what is that going to help Alvin? And then he gets on the field and it's like, oh, okay, I see. I understand now.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if those guys, some more veteran guys make appearances. But as Dennis Allen said, having 80 out of 89 guys here was a pretty big accomplishment.
Yeah, definitely. This one thing that changed this year that I wanted to ask you about, they're not doing roster cuts this year like they did before. They're just going down from 90 to 53 after the last preseason game. How does that going to affect, people's time on the field, how they're rotating guys in and out of these games? It just seems like a lot of people to have to be working with.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about that. I liked the waves of cuts, I guess, instead of this whole big everybody out on the street at the same time, because I guess your scouting department's got to be really, really, really diligent, because a lot of times, a guy will get cut for Green Bay and the Saints might pick him up.
Right.
So now you got to pay attention to that. And I guess you can do that, but man, it's hard to get a gauge of it.
Right, because you won't have any games for preseason games.
Yeah,
for them
you've only
to
got the 3 preseason games, and if you got 3 preseason games, there are going to be a lot of guys who might not get that opportunity to play and show that.
Right.
And so when you're cutting down, at least you get a chance to get a better look at some guys. But when you got all those guys out there, well, there's going to be the vet game, in which I would imagine will be game 2 for most teams, I assume. Maybe not for the Saints because they're having the joint practices, so that's going to be a preseason game for them, the joint practices. But I'm not a big fan of the whole cut from 90 to 53. That's a lot of people for a lot of teams. So what is that, 37 guys for 32 teams? That's a lot of guys to be out, and for teams to be scrambling around trying to get their practice squad together out of this. And, I think you might see a lot of teams kind of sticking with the guys that they have because they might not be able to get all the information they want game-wise on the guys that they hadn't been able to see.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see how that's handled. It seems like it could turn into like the wild, wild west with like the transfer portal has, there's people just all over available all of a sudden. And you kind of, I don't know, we'll see. But there's definitely a lot to look forward to this off season. I guess we're in season technically now. I don't necessarily know if the season ever ends, actually. but yeah, so now this is really the kind of the preseason to the preseason. So we're in it now. We're 3 practices this week, 3 for the next 2 weeks, and then you have the mandatory mini camp, and then you get a little bit of a vacation, and it's training camp, and let's hit the ground running. Let's go. Well, we'll be here for all of it. So I appreciate you, John, for jumping in, talking a little bit about today's OTAs, and we'll be catching up soon. And as always, we can read your stuff online.
We'll be here.
Appreciate John taking the time in between writing his many articles from OTAs and everything else coming up this week. As mentioned, the second 3-day stretch of OTAs will be next Tuesday to Thursday, with media getting access on Tuesday, so there'll be plenty more coming out next week. For those highlights, pictures, and sound, you can always head to NewOrleansSaints.com, the YouTube page, or @Saints on Twitter. Really appreciate you listening, and I'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Saints podcast. Join us 3 times per week on NewOrleansSaints.com, the Saints mobile app, or you can download the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Saints podcast.